Hey y'all, welcome to Small Group. My name is Will McElroy. I'm the Shoreline Men's Coordinator, and I'm so happy to be here with you today talking about 1 Timothy chapter 6. And just as a reminder, Paul is an older man and he's writing to a younger man named Timothy. And Timothy is pastoring a church in Ephesus, and Paul's just giving him some practical advice on how to pastor this church. So let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 6 and see what Paul has to say. In this last chapter, chapter 6, Paul begins by just warning Timothy of a certain type of person that's going to come to church. And Paul says in the first few verses, there will be people that come to church and use godliness as a means of gain. I read that, I'm like, what does he mean? And what he's saying here is that there will be people that come to church to advance their finances, to advance their popularity, to advance their social status. These people will call themselves Christians, they'll pursue godliness, but only as a means of gains. And so after Paul warns Timothy of that type of person, this is what he says in response in verse 6. He says that godliness with contentment is great gain. And when I read this, I start thinking in our own lives of what produces discontentment, right? There could be a lack of money, a lack of popularity, a lack of social status, bad grades, bad at sports. There's so many things in this world that produce discontentment. And Paul's saying, look, godliness with contentment produces not just gain, but great gain. And so I have two questions that I want you to ask and just discuss with your small group. What leads to discontent in your life, and how can we grow in contentment with godliness? So after Paul talks about contentment with godliness, he starts to transition a little bit. And this is some advice that someone has given me before I go into this next verse, is that when we flee, when we run from something, we need to be running towards something. And this is what Paul says in verse 11. He says, "But as for you, O man of God, flee these things." So again, he's saying flee those worldly desires, flee riches, but pursue righteousness. So we're running away from the world, we're pursuing righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, gentleness. So when we run from something, we need to be running to something as well. And that looks like running to the Lord, to faith, to steadfastness. And then this next verse is something that really sobered me. And Paul says, "Fight the good fight of faith." And when I read this verse, I was a little confused because I was like, growing up, I was taught that fighting is bad. I've been in arguments before. They never end well. And so I want you to ask your group this question. And it's something I ask myself is, why does Paul say fight the good fight? And then how do we fight the good fight? Again, as Paul closes out this chapter, this letter to Timothy, he answers a question that I think maybe all of us should be asking when we read this. And it's like, well, Paul, I know you said worldly desires are bad, riches are dangerous, but what about people that are rich? Is that evil? Is that sinful to have money, to have popularity, to be good at sports? And Paul says this in verse 17. He says, "As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy." So before I unpack that verse a little bit, I want to tell you a story of a time when I was a little boy. I went to the beach and probably was 5 or 6 years old, and I was making my first sandcastle, right? And this was my life's work. I spent the whole day building a sandcastle, and I just kept adding on top of it until it was about as tall as me, and I was so proud of it. And the sun went down, and I had to go inside, and of course, I go to sleep, and I wake up like Christmas morning because I just wanted to get back to working on my sandcastle, to add on to it, to build it higher and higher. I loved my castle. And of course, you know what happened. The next morning, I go up to the beach where I built my castle, and it was gone. The sea swept it away, just like it does. And so 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. And Paul is saying here, that's what will happen when you store up your contentment in the world. If you put your pleasures in riches, if you put your pleasures in popularity, it's going to be swept away, and you're going to be left with nothing. And so, no, it's not bad to be rich. No, it's not bad to be popular and to be good at sports. But what is dangerous is when we put our contentment in those things. And so he reminds us to put our certainty on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. And so that's Paul's final reminder to Timothy, is saying, Timothy, never forget and always tell your people that the greatest pleasures are in God. That's a wrap on 1 Timothy, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this series. I hope you enjoy your small group. And we're looking forward to seeing you at Summer Shoreline, which starts June 2nd. So we hope to see you there. And I hope you have a great week of worship.